jealousy, and the shoe center. So anyway, again, another diagram here. These are important scientific diagrams for understanding the difference between men and women. So women talk, babies, respect. Here's something that's kind of interesting. You look at, do men really care that their romantic interests respect them? Well, somewhat. If it's a long-term relationship, if it's a one-night stand, the man's not going to be like waking up the next morning wondering if his sexual partner respected him for having sex on the first date. Security, and again, if you're looking for a mate who's going to protect you, protect your children, be a good provider, all those things. Love, really big. Men care more about sex than love. Football, beer, TV, sports, sex, and food, and beer, right? So, again, these are like extreme stereotypes, but the stereotypes express something underlying these general differences between men and women. Now, here are some actual brain differences. And here are some interesting things about development. So baby girls develop their corpus callosum, which is this area that sort of goes across both the right and left brain, and it's earlier than boys, and that's why they develop language skills faster. And this is why, generally speaking, in the early grades, the girls tend to outpace the boys in academics. And I actually often throughout too, but especially in those early grades, with the verbal skills. So all boys seem to develop distance vision and space perception better than most girls, giving them an advantage at some sports. And so the sort of stereotypes of the girls being really good at the reading and writing, and the boys being good at sports. And so you get this as girls also tend to mature more quickly. And so they are able to handle responsibility earlier on, delay gratification, things like that. Boys tend to be more impulsive, and maturity comes later for them. So where does this lead us? Oh, sociological differences. So you get differences in biology. Those lead to differences in psychology. Differences in psychology lead to differences in sociology or culture. And so you have sociological, or I suppose we could also say anthropological differences. So you had, again, the evolution of gender roles in hunter-gatherer societies. If you're big as a whale, you're 6, 7, 8 months pregnant, you're not going to be like running out there chasing the woolly mammoth or fighting against an enemy tribe. You're going to be a liability. You're going to be at home, helping to care for, say, other people's kids. You're going to be sticking close to the cave, digging for those roots and berries, or digging for the roots and picking the berries off the tree, looking for things, cooking and keeping the fires, the fire in the cave stoked, and those sorts of things. Men are going to be out there hunting and fighting enemy tribesmen. So this led to the position where you could see how women would be in a dependent position, since they're defenseless when they're pregnant. There's no birth control, so so you're pregnant a lot of the time, and you give birth to a lot of children. And so when you're fertile, you're spending a lot of your time pregnant. You're defensive, and so you rely on some man to defend you. And this, creates a sort of, human nature being what it is. You have oppression of women. Women came to be seen as the property of their husbands. And when you have two tribes that are fighting against each other, one way to sort of cease hostilities is you say, hey, I'll tell you what, I'll marry my daughter to your son, and that will mean that our tribes are joined by blood, and then we don't have to fight each other. And this was done, clear through like the Middle Ages. people would do this. That you'd have royalty, like the prince of this country would marry the princess of this country to as a way, as sort of part of a peace treaty. And so you get women sort of being shuffled around, and then do the children have any choice of that? No. The son might have more choice. You might say, no way, and maybe that would be respected, or would be more likely to be respected. But you had arranged marriages. So whenever you hear some politician talking about, I believe in traditional marriage, you think, oh, you believe in arranged marriages? You believe women should be sort of traded around like property, and that sons shouldn't have any say on who they marry. That's traditional marriage. Traditional marriages were arranged marriages where women had no rights of inheritance, they had no right to property, and they were considered to be the properties of their fathers or their husband. And so, so I don't want to give a short shrift to this. I think the feminist movement has a lot of things to say about the way women were treated for most of the world's history. And women are treated as second-class citizens, and in some places better than others, right? So there's some cases where women had more rights, other places where they had less rights, and so but always, never equal rights with a man until very recently, say the last, I don't know how far back I go, legal equality, maybe in the 60s or 70s, I suppose, sometime around there in the U.S. at least. The women's rights movement didn't really start until the 19th century in earnest. So anything anyone has to share about that, about the history of oppression of women, egregious examples, things, good examples of women being oppressed and treated as less than men? You guys get like hammered with this over and over again in your other social science classes? This tends to be the whole deal in people. Yeah, it's just sort of like the whole focus of class, at least in the scuttlebutt I get from students. Anyway, so I don't want to downplay this, that you have a whole, and you can read this, I try to think of some of the examples. A lot of this has to do with the religion, so you have religions which emerge at the time where you have rampant sexism, and then it gets into the religion itself. So in the Quran, for example, there's a passage in the Quran in Surah 4, starting around verse 3. It says, men are the managers of the affairs of women. Those you fear are disobedient, banish them to their couches and beat them. And so the idea is, what do you do if your wife's not listening to you? Well, you treat her like a child, right? You send her to her room and you give her a spanking or whatever, right? It's this idea that corporal punishment for your wife if she doesn't listen to you. Banish her to her couch, sort of like send her to her room, essentially. And who's in charge? The man's in charge. And because this is written in 7th century Arabia, but because Prophet Muhammad claimed that he was getting this directly from the angel Gabriel, and it's written in the Holy Quran, which is gets spread as God's word, then people think, okay, well, this is the way things are, and this is why women can't drive cars in Saudi Arabia, and why, generally speaking, in Islamic countries, women's rights, are not as well respected as in more secular countries like in Western Europe. Now you get the same thing in Christianity, perhaps not as strong. So you have a man is the head of a woman, as Christ is the head of the church. And you get, it says, husbands, wives, obey your husbands, says the Apostle Paul. Husbands, love your wives. Doesn't say husbands, obey your wives. So who's the one that's doing the obeying? Well, it's the woman. Another place he says, I don't allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. She is to remain silent. If she has a question, let her ask her husband at home. It's just one of the letters to Timothy. So you get this similar sort of thing in Christianity. And so why is there a difference today in Saudi Arabia versus, say, France? Well, it's this thing, the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, right? So it's the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. So you had a big change in Western Europe, the Renaissance, the influence of secular humanism, the classic Greco-Roman culture sort of pushing Christianity out, and in some ways merging with it. And so you're getting these individualist notions of equality and liberty and so on, for lots of complex reasons, the Islamic world sort of that didn't really have a renaissance and came late to it in a lot of ways, and sociologically in some Middle Eastern countries are still sort of living in the Middle Ages as far as their views of gender roles. So, and even in the U.S., even as 100 years ago, you had women couldn't own property, women wouldn't have inheritance rights. A woman couldn't even have her own bank account. If there was a divorce, the man would get all the property. So just and then trying to get a job as a woman. There's some really strong women that did it, but pretty difficult thing to do to get a job as a woman. And you're sort of relegated things like school teacher and nurse and these sort of traditional roles for women, which have a lot of sort of womanly aspects to them, nurturing. Even the job of secretary. Most secretaries used to be men before World War II. Oh, before World War I, I guess. You got so patriarchy. Here's a good term for you to know for the exam. Patriarchy, ruled by men. And so that's what we had for up until the 19th century when things started to change. So in the last 150 years, you had some changes in gender roles, and I don't want to give not give credit to the women's movement, but a lot of these changes didn't happen because a bunch of women organized and started protesting and forming groups and so on. But it's part of the natural evolution of human society. And so 150 years ago, you had the Industrial Revolution. And you started having factory work. Why would the Industrial Revolution be something which would change gender roles? That's that. Any ideas about that?
Create surplus.
Yes, you have more surplus goods. Sure, you're able to mass produce goods, and there's more goods around. I suppose that means what? More leisure time. And then how might that change gender roles? Think about the worker in an industrial civilization as opposed to a medieval one. So if you don't have a factory making shoes, how do you make shoes? Anybody here ever tried to make a shoe? Making shoes is a really tough thing. You don't realize how much stress you put on your shoes every day. And if you bought a shoddy pair of shoes that's poorly manufactured, you might have noticed the stuff rips off and it falls apart, and after 6 months you're oh, the cheap junk, right? And so to make a shoe that will last a long time, you got to know what you're doing. And so typically you have these highly skilled craftspeople that make shoes and pots. And I don't know if you ever try to make one of those clay pots with the spinning wheel, and you're trying to shape it right, and it all usually just falls apart. And it takes a while to make something really good by hand. If you ever tried to make clothes by hand, it's a tough thing to do, and it's got to fit just right. And so it was all artisans that did this, tailors and shoemakers and people that make pots, potters. So bakers, right? So all these people that do this stuff, it's a skill you have to learn. You gotta go to school for it. And they didn't have formal schools. What they would have was a mentor system or an apprentice system. So you want to be a shoemaker, chances are your dad's a shoemaker, and so you're just you're going to follow in his footsteps. After a certain age, you're going to the shop, he's showing you how to do stuff, and you want to be a shoemaker like dear old dad. If your father's a blacksmith, you're going to be a blacksmith. If your father's a soldier and he doesn't want you to be a soldier, he might send you over to the blacksmith to be an apprentice. Or if you have some affinity or special skill as a musician or whatever, you'll be apprenticed to a person who's an expert and kind of learn the ropes as you work. And probably most, to start out with, you're sweeping up the shop and doing a lot of menial stuff. But you're learning the trade over time. Well, Now, why would you want a girl as an apprentice? Suppose you had a choice between like a boy, the 16-year-old boy, or a 15-year-old boy, and a 15-year-old girl. You're living in the Middle Ages, yeah.
Because she might start having children.
Yeah, she gets knocked up, and there goes your apprentice, right? Maybe you put like a year or 2 years into this girl, and she gets herself knocked up by some guy, gets married, and she's gone, and she's off to be a wife and a mother, and you just put 2 years of training into this girl for nothing. That's a big hit on your business. And now you got to find a new apprentice, right? And put 2 more years. Are you going to pick a girl that time? Probably not. So there were business reasons and social reasons why you didn't want to apprentice a woman, because there's no birth control, so at any time she get knocked up. If a guy knocks up a girl, well, so he's got another mouth to feed. He's just going to work all the more harder at being good at his job. He's going to maybe ask to put in more time because he has a family to provide for now. So that might even be a plus. And they actually used to ask discriminatory questions when you go to apply for a job. They'd ask you, like, if you had a wife and kids, that would show that you had stability, you were probably going to stay there a long time, that you would be a dedicated employee. Single men were looked at sort of like suspicion, with suspicion. And if you're a woman applying for a job, well, forget about it. And sometimes the employer would say, look, honey, we got men with families to provide for. We can't hire you. Why don't you go find yourself a man? So that's the Industrial Revolution really made things different in that it allowed women to get into the workforce. You have a big factory, and suppose you have a woman working there, and she's I don't know, like putting the little rivulets in a shoe. That's something you could train like a monkey to do, right? Or you could train. It probably took you like a couple of hours to show her how to do this, or maybe a day at the most, right? So you take this little thing that looks sort of like a hole punch. You put the rivulet in here. You line it up with the little marks that girl next to you does, and you punch it. You hold it together, and then you go punch, 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 and then hand it on to the next person that puts in the tongues or whatever, right? And so you're doing that all day long, punch, 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 punch. And if you get knocked up, what's he going to do? Well, he'll just hire somebody else and train him in 2 hours or 4 hours or a day, and his loss is minimal, right? And hey, if you have kids there, maybe you can have a little maternity leave and come back and have like a little nursery for the kids. And once the kids get to be so high, well, a kid can go punch, 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 punch like that too. Have a whole family involved. And so you had child labor, women working in the workforce. And so you had jobs which required little or no training. All of a sudden businesses became more gender blind, at least for these low-level unskilled jobs, because there's no training involved. World War II brought another big change. What was going on there, do you think? Why would this bring more women into the workforce?
Men are at war.
Yeah, men are all off fighting Tojo and Hitler, and so because of that, who's gonna work in the factories that are making all these musicians? Well, it's Rosie the Riveter. Get some pictures here. Famous Howard J. Miller picture of Rosie the Riveter. Wartime poster, we can do it. She's got a little bicep there from doing all that manual work in the factory. Here's a little, probably more realistic, less sexy Rosie Riveter. Look at those biceps there, right? And see that big riveting gun. And so you had women actually doing these tough factory jobs, making planes and big guns and all kinds of munitions for our boys fighting overseas.
Look at the book counter underfoot.
Oh yeah, it's Mein Kampf.
Nazi symbol there.
Yep. Yeah, if you look at it really close, it says Mein Kampf. Yeah, so you look at that riveting gun, it's pretty substantial there. So.
Jackhammer.
Oh, it is jackhammer. Taking a sandwich break. Yeah, so you had women involved in the workforce in large numbers. And after World War II, people sort of got used to women in the workforce. And so over time, it's like people, and women had gotten a taste of working outside the home too. So that sort of sowed the seeds for women, getting in the workforce in a more permanent way after what? After the contraceptive pill was invented. So once the contraceptive pill was invented, and then other condoms and those things have been around for a while, but not in wide use. But now they have, you just take a pill and you won't get pregnant, or your chances are very slim. Then off to the races. You can put off childbearing as long as you like and get into the workforce and do anything a man can do. And so that was really the final thing that made a woman as someone who maybe might never have children a possibility. And the whole idea of the career woman that doesn't have a family or even a husband, but doesn't have to forego sexual relations. So that's a pretty hard thing for most people. Those drives are really strong. And even though maybe not as much in women as men, still women have a natural drive for relationships, and so that allowed a woman to have a romantic relationship with a man and also have a career without having to worry about children. Yeah.
Do you know the numbers as far as like what the average household numbers dropped to? Haven't it dropped over like the last 50 years because of that?
Do you mean the number of children people have?
Yeah.
Yeah, here I don't know what the numbers used to be. They used to be, like, I know people, some were Catholic, I guess, so they used birth control, but they had like 8 or 9 kids. Now I think that it's between 2 and 3 right now. It's like 2 point something or other in the U.S. Europe has like a negative population growth now, except for immigration. Most immigration is coming from these third world countries that have high birth rates. So you look at part of industrialization, you get more women in the workforce and then fewer children. You don't really need the children because in agricultural society you need lots of manual labor. In an industrial society, the need for manual labor goes down because a lot of what used to be done by hand is done by machine. And so as the society industrializes, as the economy develops and becomes more advanced, the birth rate drops. And so, and this is because you get more women in the workforce, and you get more automation, and there's no need to have a bunch of kids. And so people are happy having 2 or 3, or some people just elect to have none. So let's see, let's take our break, and then we'll talk more about feminism.
What time did we get done today?
And 2:50.